Welcome to the Good Reading Podcast, proudly sponsored by Book People Gift Cards. A Book People gift card is the perfect gift for readers of all ages. Simply order your gift card online at bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au. Redeem at any one of over 500 bookshops across Australia. Visit bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au. Michael Robotham is one of Australia's best-selling and most awarded writers of crime fiction. Today I'm talking to Michael Robotham about the fourth book in the Cyrus Haven series of psychological thrillers, Stormchild. Michael, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Stormchild is your 18th book, but let's go back a little bit. You were born and raised in country New South Wales. Your first book, The Suspect, published in 2002, was set in London and was the first in the Joe O'Loughlin series. Since then, you've won 2 Ned Kelly Awards and 2 British Crime Writers Association Gold Dagger Awards, one of which was for Life and Death, set in Texas. But thinking about your imagined trajectory in 2002, did you think of yourself as an international crime writer rather than a writer of Australian crime fiction?
Definitely. I think because I'd lived so long overseas, I was born and bred in Australia, but I spent 12 years living in the UK working on British newspapers and traveling the world, really, to cover big international stories. I did regard myself as being more international. And also this beginning I had, because that first novel, The Suspect, triggered a bidding war at the London Book Fair in 2002. And it was sold into more than 20 translations in 3 hours. So, automatically I knew I was going to be published in many, many languages. And even after that, when you look at my success, my big markets, I've always been, tremendously successful in places like Germany, Netherlands, and I think that's always made me feel like I'm very much an international writer. And as much as I'm passionate about supporting Australian crime writing, I always feel a little bit disingenuous when the subject comes up. And, I think even after I won the first Gold Dagger, someone wrote an article saying, can we call him an Australian crime writer? I am Australian, so I am an Australian crime writer. But up until this point, I haven't actually set my books in Australia. So I'm not someone who is telling Australian stories.
There are 2 dominant characters in your writing, Joe O'Loughlin and Cyrus Haven. Both are clinical psychologists. And I know you worked with Paul Britton, the high-profile British psychologist and profiler. All of this suggests a fascination with the human mind and for probing the depths of human behaviour, and perhaps searching for the motivations and catalysts for crime.
Yeah, I think that was always the case, even going back to my early days as a journalist. And I began my career on the old Sydney Sun, an afternoon newspaper in Sydney. That's my journalistic career. And the bread and butter of afternoon newspapers back in that era were crime stories and court reporting. And so I was pretty much steeped in those sorts of areas for most of my early career. But one of the things that I realized very early on, I wasn't fascinated by how many times someone was stabbed or forensic detail of what was done to people. I was interested in what went through someone's mind, why they committed that crime. It was like sitting in a courtroom and you might see someone I was quite young, I was in my early 20s, and you might see someone of my age who was in the dock, facing a murder charge. And just it would immediately spring to mind, what were the sliding door moments that saw his life spiral out of control, where he's finished up being charged with murder. And, I'm sitting here beginning, a career that I'd always dreamed about. And invariably there were those moments. You realize that there was great hardship or dysfunction or violence or whatever the factors were that saw basically lead people down that road.
Does all of this explain your preference for first-person writing, for getting inside the character rather than as narrator or observer?
Only up to a point. I think that the first-person narration stems from the fact that in my, following my career as a journalist, I was a ghostwriter, and I ghostwrote 15 autobiographies for, well-known people, be they soldiers or pop stars or politicians or whatever. This was their autobiography, and so it was written in their voice. And so my job as a ghostwriter was to capture their voice so perfectly that no one would recognize my fingerprints on the manuscript. it would look and sound and feel just like them. And so I guess having written 15 books in the first person and trying to create unique voices for each of these individuals, it was a natural progression that when I wrote, my own fiction, that I would steer towards first person narratives, which are quite unusual in the crime genre. Sometimes I have written from the villain's point of view in certain books, and so it has been about getting inside their head. But I found that quite disturbing. I do feel as though writing is a bit like being an actor, and you have to get into character and you have to live and breathe that character, which is fine when you're writing, from the point of view of Joe O'Loughlin or Cyrus Haven, but it's more difficult when you're writing from the point of view of the villain. And there were times when I would finish my writing for the day and would have a scalding hot shower and curl up in bed, and I'd want the voice to get out of my head.
I guess these are some of the pitfalls as opposed to the advantages of writing in the first person.
Yeah, it leads tremendous immediacy to often write in the first person present tense as well. It lends an incredible immediacy and intimacy because the reader feels as though they are experiencing the story which is unfolding in real time, just as it is for my protagonist. And so, when my hero is clinging, by his fingertips from a cliff, the reader is there with him clinging from the cliff top. And because I don't plot in advance, I'm there as well, hanging from that same cliff top, wondering how the hell I'm going to get him off the mountain.
Let's get back to the story. Storm Child, your 18th book. It begins with the bodies of 17 migrants washed up on a Lincolnshire beach. Their boat has apparently been rammed and sunk. Can you set the scene for us?
Yeah, it begins with, my two main characters in this book are Cyrus Haven and Evie Cormac. And Evie's this incredibly damaged young woman who, as a child, was found hiding in a secret room where a man had been tortured to death, and she never reveals her true name or her age or where she came from, not completely anyway. And Evie has this incredible ability to tell when someone is lying, and it's not a superpower, it's a curse. And Cyrus Haven has taken upon himself to try to protect Evie because he knows she'll never have a normal life. She'll never have a normal relationship because three little words like I love you or I miss you are incredibly damaging for someone like Evie who knows when they're genuine or not. But her past is still a mystery. And so when she witnesses these bodies begin to wash up on a beach in Lincolnshire, it triggers Evie, who goes into a catatonic state and flashes back into her childhood. And Cyrus quickly realizes there is something about that scene which is a link to Evie's past. And in trying to help the police solve that crime, the deaths of those 17 migrants, he also tries to unlock the secrets of Evie's past. But in doing so, the same dark forces that once imprisoned Evie are still waiting for her and waiting to drag her back.
As I read this book, I felt like Cyrus was at a crossroads with Evie. Will this story bring us a little closer to Evie's creation story?
This is Evie's creation story. I mean, you don't discover fully in the story where Evie's abilities came from, but you do discover her backstory and how she got to the UK and she got put in that secret room. What I don't know going forward is whether this is the last Evie and Cyrus book or not. And on the one hand, I think it sort of completes a circle. And I've always been fascinated by researching and discovering more about Evie, what it would be like to go through life, always telling when someone was lying, because we lie all the time. We lie between 10 and 200 times a day to the people we love, normally to keep our relationships together and our friendships strong. And, with Evie, it was always, is there something still I want to discover? And I'm not sure there is now with Evie. There may be, but at the moment, I don't have another idea for another Evie and Cyrus book. But, watch this space.
And will Evie's skills as a truth wizard, as she's been dubbed, will that be an asset in this case?
It's always been very difficult. Any crime writer, who tells you that they've come up with a main character who can tell when someone is lying, they're on track to write the shortest crime novel in history. Evie can never be an investigator. They could never be this sort of wonderful crime-solving duo because Evie would basically solve the crime within the first 15 pages. She would just get all the suspects in a room and just ask them, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? So the only way I could make Evie work on the page was to have her so damaged and so dysfunctional and such a pathological liar herself that nobody believes Evie when she does tell them something. Evie, she can be a help, but she can also be a hindrance because she's so self-destructive. She's so self-sabotaging because she is so damaged. I mean, she was so badly abused that people have to forgive her.
I think you describe her as an all year round nihilist.
That's Evie. That is Evie. All seasons, all weathers.
That made me wonder whether she may actually be in search of her own truth.
Yeah, I think she's in search of her own truth, and I think what I love about the dynamic between Evie and Cyrus. Cyrus himself has a tragic backstory. You know, at the age of 13, he came home from soccer practice to discover his entire family had been murdered. You know, he's become a forensic psychologist really to try to uncover the reasons for that. But Evie Cormac is this damaged young woman. She's got every reason to never, ever, ever trust another human being again, given what's happened to her. Certainly not a man. And yet in Cyrus, she's found someone she can trust. And I think that's because Evie can recognize in Cyrus someone that's potentially even more damaged than she is, and that together they might be able to save each other.
As the story progresses, Evie takes a particular interest in the one survivor of the tragedy on that Lincolnshire beach, Arben Pasha. Why is Evie so concerned with Arben?
Evie can see, I mean, Evie herself is an orphan, believes herself to be an orphan, having lost her entire family. And Arben has lost his entire family on that small boat tragedy. And so she can see someone who is a survivor and an orphan and is isolated and alone in a strange country, all of which had once described Evie. And so that's why she bonds with him in a way, because she can understand what he's going through.
We're also introduced to an elusive figure, the ferryman. Without giving too much away, what can you tell us about the ferryman?
Law enforcement see the ferryman as a myth. He's like one of these sort of mythical villains, like a Kaiser Soze type villain who is responsible for a lot of the people trafficking across Europe. And but what they don't know is if he's actually, the police and the authorities and Interpol don't know if he's a real figure, because certainly the migrants believe he's real and they're terrified of this man. On the one hand, he facilitates crossings and people trafficking, but on the other hand, he demands a high price. And so nobody knows his name, nobody knows, has a photograph or his true identity. But the migrants believe that he's real, and that's all that matters because that controls them. And the authorities, they're not sure whether he's real or not.
Immigrants arriving by boat is a contentious issue in many parts of the world, as is people smuggling. But while it has all sorts of political and humanitarian implications, what was it that interested you as a writer of crime fiction?
I mean, all of the above, really. It's a huge issue in the UK at the moment. It's a huge issue everywhere, but in the UK, the small boat crossings seem to be getting worse year out, and they are looking at an offshore processing solution, much like Australia adopted. It's hugely controversial. It's a very polarizing debate. There are people that believe the boat should be turned back and a zero tolerance policy. There are others that believe that, you know, for humanitarian reasons and people that are genuine asylum seekers, they should be treated with compassion and humanity. And they don't want to see people perishing in small boats on the journey. And so what I try to do in this book is to give both sides of that story, both sides of that argument, and both sides have got legitimate points to make. And so all I do is set that as a backdrop of try to tell Evie's story and uncover Evie's secrets. But I give it this political backdrop, which, you know, as I said, no crime fiction should set out to educate or to lecture. People can learn things, you know, but I didn't set out to write some polemic or some essay on giving my opinions on people trafficking or asylum seeking.
It sets up a rather complex web of intrigue.
Yeah, I mean that's the aim really. It's to create enough mystery and intrigue. The best crime fiction, it's character driven anyway, more so than plot driven. But you do need a plot. You do need a mystery. you do need conflict that has to be resolved. And I guess this is a story where I expect a lot of readers to pick certain parts of this story and to pick who the real villain is. But that doesn't really concern me if some people get that early in the piece or earlier than others. What drives you through are the twists and turns in Evie's life and unlocking Evie's secrets. The interesting thing about writing this series is I had no overarching narrative. When I began, I wrote in that first book in the series, Good Girl, Bad Girl, Evie is found hiding in that secret room as a child. And when I got to the end of that first book, I still didn't know who'd put her in that room. I hadn't plotted this thing out in advance. So I had to write the second book, which is When She Was Good, using the clues I put in the first book, but still with no idea how I was going to, how it was going to finish. And even when I got to the point of this last book, which is Evie's creation story, I mean, it unfolds for me at the same time as it does for the reader. As I join the dots, I hope the reader is joining the dots.
After 18 books, so much success, who do you write for? What's the compulsion to write?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's funny, when my dad died, which was after my fifth novel was published, and I remember being devastated, and I'd spent my entire life trying to impress my father. And I remember saying to my wife, I don't know who I'm doing it for anymore. Because I think, who am I trying to impress now? And I guess you end up you do it for yourself. I suffer from, as a lot of writers do, imposter syndrome. I sign every book to my agent, dear Mark, we've filled them again. I sort of figure each story is going to be the one that exposes me as a complete fraud and that I don't know what I'm doing. And that's after 18 books. And so it's not quite as bad as it used to be. But I think a lot of the time it's just me trying to prove to myself that this wasn't just a fluke.
Now, with all this experience in plotting and insights into the human mind, do you think you yourself would make a good criminal capable of the perfect crime?
No, I think I once joked that I'm so terrible. To quote Woody Allen, he once said that, Woody Allen would steal second base, feel guilty and go back. That's me, really. I'd be a terrible criminal. One of the things I learned from working with Paul Britton was that most criminals, they're not clever. That's the reason they get caught. And most criminals get caught because they plot the crime. The clever ones plot the crime, but they don't plot the aftermath of the crime. They don't plot what happens afterwards. And I think I'm like that with my writing. The reason I don't plot in advance is because I get bored if I try to plot out an entire book. I just think of a good opening and think, oh, I've got to get into it. So if I was plotting a crime, I'd think of a good way to rob a bank, and I'd rob the bank, but not think at all about what was going to happen afterwards. So I think I'd get caught pretty quickly.
Michael Robotham, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you again, and thanks for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
I've been talking to Michael Robotham about his new thriller, Stormchild. It's published by Hachette, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. This Good Reading Podcast was brought to you by Book People Gift Cards. Share the joy of reading with a Book People gift card. To find out more, visit bookpeoplegiftcards.org.au.